Good evening and welcome back for the final core session of KMF 2025. Folks, the greatest uncertainty we face each day isn't the markets or the weather, it's us. We change our minds and contradict ourselves, but that unpredictability makes us human, both the risk and the opportunity. Humanity has always been defined not by avoiding uncertainty, but by stepping into it, daring to make the unknown known. This final session is about reflecting on what that means, how we embrace the permanent, intolerable uncertainty, not as something to manage or fear, but what binds us together as we face the future, the unknown, together. So ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together for our esteemed panelists. Please welcome Dr. Alaa Murabit, strategist and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals advocate, Seng, senior advisor, DBS Group, Professor Ulrike Schaede, professor of Japanese business and director, Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology, School of Global Policy and Strategy, University of California, San Diego, and our moderator, Shahrizal Suffian, Head of Strategic Human Capital Management at Khazanah Nasional. Over to you, Shah.
Oops. Assalamualaikum and good evening, everybody. At this particular stage of the day, you're thinking probably two things. How bad is traffic outside? Is it raining? And what basically would this last session offer? It's one of those things that I think, having been also listening to a lot of the conversations here and looking at all the topics of conversations happening outside, one of the things that I think we can all agree is that uncertainty is something that we do live with almost on an everyday basis, right? What we choose to wear, what we choose to eat, how we decide the day, what basically is the conversations that we have. And so therefore, what we basically have heard over the last 2 days has been a myriad of opportunities for us to essentially reflect and talk about really what would make some of the decisions better as we progress as leaders, right? So again, one of the things that I took away from yesterday was 2 points that the Prime Minister talked about, and one was the fact that we are constantly basically talking about being faced with variable visions of clarity. And I think the other one was talking about the aspects of humility. Now, this is important for us because as we have grown as leaders, there have always been different schools of how we have grown as leaders and what we have been basically taught us to think about. So, I'm very pleased to be able to be part of this particular afternoon with 3 distinguished guests. And I'm sure most of you have already heard from Professor Schaede in the previous session, but allow me very briefly to also introduce the other 2 panelists. So to my immediate left, I have basically Dr. Alaa Murabit. It's the nerves, right? Dr. Murabit is a physician, global leader, and United Nations high-level commissioner, recognized for her work in peace building, leadership, and inclusive governance. As one of the only 17 Global Sustainable Development Goal advocates appointed by the UN Secretary General, she has championed the role of trust, transparency, and inclusion in leadership, especially in context of fragility and uncertainty. Through her initiatives such as the Voice of Libyan Women and Every Woman, Every Child, she has shown how moral courage and empathy can transform uncertainty into collective resilience. So welcome to Malaysia and thank you for coming in. Next to her, we have Mr. Seng. Mr. Seng is the former senior advisor at DBS Group and has held senior roles across risk management, corporate banking, and strategy at DBS and Citibank. With decades of experience in financial leadership, he has witnessed firsthand how institutions navigate crisis, from managing systemic risks to seizing opportunities for growth amid volatility. His perspective is invaluable as we consider how we in organizations in Malaysia can also treat uncertainty not merely as something to be hedged, but also as the foundation for innovation, renewal, and long-term value creation. So we have three different perspectives, three different experts, and I'd like probably to be able to start the session with a question posed to Professor Schaede. So Professor, you talked in your presentation and in the light of work, you highlight again Japan's preference for stability and long-term orientation. You also mentioned that strategic pivot for the new Japan companies involves breakthrough innovation. So can you say a bit more about how the guardrails are framed or reframed as enablers of constructive risk-taking in uncertain times, rather than as seen as inhibitors, and what, in your sense, is an innovation sabbatical? Please.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to go a little bit deeper into that. So one of the challenges in a country like Japan, where there's a shame associated with failure, and there's this very rigid employment system, and if you fall out of that, then you don't really know where you're headed, and so there's a certain risk aversion, and one of the things that Japanese companies have been doing to support innovation in that system is basically the opposite of Silicon Valley. So in Silicon Valley, we believe you have to have a hungry spirit, and you have to want to go to the moon or beyond, the Mars or something, and you have to give it your all, and when you fail, there's really not much you can do other than maybe join another startup and start all over again. And so people are 100% in. In Japan, that is too risky a career choice. And so in order to enable people who are fundamentally risk averse to kind of dabble in innovation and entrepreneurship, large companies have developed a system where you can stay employed with the large employer and go out and work for a startup for a year. And that has and it sounds like really kind of strange, it would not work in legal terms in the US, but Japan has found a way to do this, and it's not a big system, but it's an interesting sort of idea. So what happens then is that the young employee goes to a startup, and first of all, they realize that the grass is not necessarily greener elsewhere, right? So that company has its own challenges, and so, my own company is not so bad. If they're successful and innovative, then the large company benefits because they have the opportunity to engage with this startup. Or if the employee fails and comes back, they have, a great experience, and they're filled with, a gratitude that they're back at the big company. So Japan has fundamentally, what this is to develop a system with a safety net. And from a Silicon Valley perspective, that is just a non sequitur, that there would be not enough risk-taking, not enough reach. But within the Japanese system, it works because it helps overcome certain risk aversion when it comes to career choices. And so that is just one example where you can actually set up guardrails and create innovation that you would otherwise not have to have at all.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Murabit, so again, when we're looking at this session itself, right, we note that when people are looking at uncertainty, people tend to essentially catastrophize things. It looks at, it's a lot worse than it necessarily needs to be, and that tends to create a lot of feelings of nervousness, anxiety, or even, essentially what to do in that sense. And some of the things that in your experience itself, how do we basically build trust through transparency? Right? Because I think it's one of those things where people do realize that it's something that we should do, but it's one of the things that it feels hardest to do. So, welcome your thoughts.
I think trust is cumulative, right? And so transparency, oftentimes I'll hear leaders tell me like, I was transparent with the team about the decision I made. And I actually think it's that notion of co-architecture, co-engagement over time. Now, really quickly on the debugging uncertainty writ large, I hear this so often. We live in such uncertain times. And I am of the generation that went to university through a global economic crash, has lived through a pandemic. I would argue that it's been pretty uncertain for a while. It feels like it is on speed rails because of AI and because of the unique uncertainty that I think a lot of the job market and the global economic landscape feels like post-COVID and now with new innovations, but it has been uncertain for a while. And I think the most effective leadership when it comes to uncertainty is actually clarity. It's not overcompensating, it's not saying you have all the answers, but it's being very clear about what you know, what you don't know, how you intend to learn, where you failed. That to me has been a really effective model because it invites people into a conversation. And I think to the opening speech we heard yesterday, it is really humility in leadership. No one is saying that you have to show up incredibly vulnerable to your team, to your organization, or to your country. But what you do need to be able to do is have clarity. That is kindness. It's kindness for employees. It's kindness for yourself. It's kindness for shareholders. Say this is an area, this is a learning strategy if you're going to be trying something new. Say, you know what, we tried that. And I give props to GiveWell, which is a US philanthropic organization that on their website has, hey, these are things we tried, we failed at, it didn't work, we learned, this is what we learned. There's an element of trust that you build through being honest about both success, failure, and potential opportunity. And the second thing I'll say quickly is I think one of the imaginations that we have had is that someone out there has answers. Someone knows how AI is going to completely shift the workforce. Someone does. It's not us. We'll find that person. That'll be an expert we bring in, and they'll tell us. No one knows. Let's be very clear. History has shown us that on average, every 75 years, roughly 50% of the business workforce changes in one way or another. It looks like we're at that inflection point, right? And when we look back in 75 years, I don't think this 75 years is at large going to feel very different. We're in a fast pace of it. It's an incredibly fast chapter. We'll see a lot of shift and a lot of turnover, but this has happened before. And so a question I would really, or an urge I have for everyone is the learnings we have, the experiences we have, the relationships, the community, the trust, and the leadership skills are cyclical. We can actually learn a lot from industries that came before us, from experiences, from crises, and from opportunities. And what we have seen is that the most effective leaders can take moments of exceptional uncertainty and with clarity and with frequent communication, which is really how you build transparency, they turn them into the most effective opportunities for resilience and innovation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lim, as someone who's gone through a period of uncertainty and helping out with the transformation of DBS, as you've talked about, would you be able to share your own experiences in going through some of
Okay, maybe before I answer that question, let me comment on Dr. Alaa's Murabit's point. I agree that it's not just this period that we have uncertainty. It's always been there in history, so there's nothing new. And how we address it is to being honest with what we know and what we don't know. So I think yesterday, I can't remember which session it was, it talks about being clear on what you know, it talks about being clear on what you don't know, and it talks about being clear on what you're going to do about getting the information that you don't know. You know, and it's a journey that, you know, you walk with your employees and with your shareholders and with your customers. I'll give you an example, okay? When I first joined DBS about 15 years ago, I think within the first year, there was an incident whereby there was a hack onto the ATM. It was cloned and money was taken out in Europe, okay? And we had to basically go on in front of the press and we told them what happened. We told them how we are controlling it. We told them what we know. We also told them what we don't know, but what we need to do to control what we don't know. And basically it was very well accepted. It's not like we have all the answers and we don't want to, like, you know, tell, because eventually the press will catch you, the public will catch you. So in the end, that was handled quite well. In DBS, when we, I'm sure most of you here would know Piyush Gupta, my boss. You know, we were in Citibank together for 27 years, and when he became Group CEO for DBS, he hired me to come along. So it's been a wonderful journey with him the last 15 years. And I think the first order for any organization, the chairman and the Group CEO must be aligned. These are the two most important persons in the organization. And once that's aligned, you know, you start off with the vision that you have, then you have the strategy. And a lot of times, CEO forget that culture cannot be subservient to strategy. You can't just have culture without strategy, of course, because you need to make money. But I think Peter Drucker said it best, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think, Piyush with his management team, and I define his leadership as the ability to gather a team, and together we do more than the sums of the individual parts. Because, he didn't like the American style, fire everybody and hire everybody new. He kept the old team, he brought in a few of us, we became one team, and then we were very clear on what we want to do, how we want to do it, who does what. So the baton was passed properly between one another, and we don't always get it right. And a lot of times people think that our decisions, wow, why are we so good? We make so many good decisions. We get our decisions wrong, but when we get it wrong, we are not afraid to admit we got it wrong, and we pivot accordingly, and we explain it. Either because of new data or the results outcome weren't what we want. And then when we execute, we also don't always get it right, but we pick ourselves up again and we do it. So within the last 15 years, we have gone from really a bank that was not doing so well, the last couple of years we've been named the best bank in the world. So I think, we had a great strategy. We understood that we need to put in the values, because culture, end of the day, is a group of people sharing a common set of values, and together, based on those belief principles, it drives a common set of behaviors. So it's a combination of both things that got the bank to where it is today.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, on that note, again, Professor Schaede, you talked about, again, the changes that you see in Japan. Obviously, there's a lot of different perspectives in terms of how that's impacted the leadership practices of Japan itself. Would you be able to basically share what you see as some of the things that have been practiced in Japan today that have kind of like followed some of the things that have been sustainable for them, and maybe a couple of good examples for that?
So there's this insight that the role of a leader is not to forecast the future. The role of the leader is to set up the company such that it can be successful in the future, no matter what that future is. And what I've seen in my research of these new Japan companies, not the bad slow, but the good slow Japan companies, is that those leaders had a great handle on how to chart the future profile of their company. And they would, the concept paper of this conference mentions Fujifilm and Kodak. And as many of you may remember, in the year 1999, when we still had analog cameras, both of these companies had a 35% global market share, and then the rest was Aqua or something, and some knockoffs. And so today, Fujifilm is still a $23 billion company, and Kodak is only a brand, and the company no longer exists. So what happened was that the CEO of Fujifilm in 1999 basically said, I don't know what the future is, but I do know that analog photography is going to go away. So much is clear. So he got his top 20 people in the room and said, okay, let's look at what is our core competence, surface chemistry. What can we do with surface chemistry that gets us to new customers with some film associated stuff? And what can we do with surface chemistry when we extend it, new technologies, and what else is, brand new? And so they are today basically a CDMO company, so they make drugs for other companies. They have a great cosmetics line, surface chemistry. They are, there's a Japan Inside part of that story. They make films for screens and digital imaging and so forth and so on. And they have some experiments in regenerative medicine. And that is a great example of a leader who, Komori-san couldn't possibly know where the world is going. Oh, I forgot the endoscopes, right? Camera, medical device. Right? So he couldn't possibly know where the world was going, but he could set up a plan for the company to take the core competencies and extend them into the future. And then the important aspect of the leadership here is that he didn't just tell them what to do, right? He went in and he got some of the younger folks involved in the mid-level, and and said, oh, this is the you 35, 40-year-olds, this is your company. In 20 years from now, this is your company, so tell us where you want this to go. And by taking everybody with him, he actually had a good team behind him that he could make this pivot with. Right. And Kodak knew the exact same thing. Kodak knew that analog film would want to go away. Kodak had the exact same core competencies, and they could do nothing with it. It's a leadership story.
I just want to build on that because I love what you said about, I think that leaders, their role is not to be able to forecast the future, which we often assume that they can and should be able to do, right? But to build on that, I think the most effective skill a leader has, other than being able to build resilience in their team, and that means building an effective team, it does mean bringing people along, et cetera, is how they make decisions. An incredible leader is an incredible decision maker, because they know what questions to ask, and then they know, okay, based on these answers, we're going down route A or route B, and these are the implications of those answers. But if you think of any leader you admire, any leader you really respect and you think has been able to really, kind of push through challenging times, challenging circumstances, rebuild culture, et cetera, it's because they've been able to ask the right questions and make the right decisions. And I think that's a skill that we need to recultivate. And to your point about leadership skills you can help shape in anyone, I think decision-making, the art of decision-making, the rigor, the ability to feel comfortable when the answer is not the one you thought it was, is a very unique skill that we need to rebuild.
Yeah, if I may add on to that is that sometimes a decision is not very clear and you can go A or B and there's no right or wrong answer. But if you take time to explain why you went with B instead of A and you explain sort of your rationale behind it, everybody can buy in, and if it really didn't pan out well, everybody knows there's no like blaming one another and we pivot accordingly. That's how I think, good leaders can really bring the team along. And like I said earlier, leadership is really the ability to gather a team and together do more than the sums of the individual parts. I also want to comment about Japan. Japan is really a very interesting country, a little bit different off from everyone. I worked in Japan for many years. In fact, I lived in Japan for a total of 18 years. And I used to joke, I hope the Japanese don't take it too badly. I used to joke that Japan was the only communist country that worked, because it's really a capitalistic country, but in many ways it's like a oxymoron. They are so advanced and yet they are so traditional. They do things so detailed and perfect, and sometimes, it's the other way around. And Fuji is a great example of, what the possibility of what Japan can do. They are smart people, they are hardworking people, they do sacrifice, they do take short-term pain for longer-term gains. So again, sometimes I wonder, maybe because culturally it is what it is, so they take a slower part than the rest, and I tend to see it from my American trained eyes. So maybe Professor is right that they are slow, but they are not stagnant, and they are taking a different part from the rest of us. So,
thank you. So we talk about culture, as you've just talked about some of these and practices of that. And one of the things I recognize, as you've mentioned, is the label of humility. It's essentially for leaders to be able to say, I don't know. I've not actually, in my own experience in some of these things, recognized whether or not some organizations or even countries are comfortable with the notion of leaders not being able to say, I don't know. Because there's a certain amount of confidence you project on your leader. There's a certain amount of, I guess, iconic or idealism that you basically accord to that because you want to be able to work for the organization through the leaders. So I'm actually quite interested to hear all three of your thoughts around, again, where do you see that happening most, and why is that becoming even more prevalent in this particular day and age where, because of uncertainty, people are looking for a certain sense of certainty in that?
You can't say, I don't know, and leave it at that.
Okay.
If you say, I don't know, but to know what I need to know, these are the 5 questions or 10 questions I need to answer. So you bootstrap yourself or you track it backwards. So like in Q&A, it's very simple. I'm always very comfortable because when I don't know the answer, I tell the audience I don't know the answer. Then I'll tell the audience, what do I need to know? What are the building blocks that I need to get my information on to derive the answer? So if you just say, I don't know, and stop it at that, there'll be no confidence in you.
Yeah, and to build on that, not just I don't know when you're about to do something or I actually think real humility is when you've made a decision, when you've gone down a path and you can come back and say, actually, this is what we learned. We went down the wrong path. This is what we learned. This is how we're going to, shift our decision making, and this is what it means. I think for me, the notion of like showing up and being, well, I just don't know, is not something I would expect from a leader either. But I would expect them to be honest and tell me, okay, where are they seeking clarity? What questions are they asking? And I think where it's really important to show humility is them saying, you know what, I'm not the expert in this. I've brought the experts here. I have built a team that can help us answer this, or I'm having the right conversations that will really help us answer this. But I do think humility is both before, during, and after a decision. And how do you actually really integrate it into the way that you work, but also in your leadership team, I think is critically important. In terms of who I see doing it a lot, I think we actually have more permission than ever to say there's questions we don't have the answer to. During COVID, everybody was saying, I don't know. I mean, you couldn't find, even people who knew were like, I don't know. And these are the questions we're asking. And I think AI has only expanded that, where people are like, you know what, we actually really don't know. We know the innovation is going to be incredible. We know it's going to take us places. We don't know what the social ramifications are. We don't necessarily know what the economic ramifications are. We can forecast and model which industries will be most impacted, which countries, which regions. But I think there is more openness than there has been in a long time to say we're actually learning, we're building the plane as we fly it.
So could I just, when you say I don't know, that's not, I have no clue, or something. You just, I need more information to make a decision. So if you think about, while we were waiting for this panel to start, we were talking about whether leadership can be taught. And I think we might agree at the end of this conversation on this. I think to some degree, just like negotiations, you can actually acquire certain tools of leadership, right? And so there are executive coaches that do this. But if you think about, okay, what makes for a good leader? I think there's this model that we're developing about the 3C of leadership, and I want to throw it out here, and you can tell me what you think. So if you think about what would other people follow you, right? That's what a leader is. A leader goes ahead and says, we're going to do this. So why would you follow somebody who is your boss? And the answer, I think, can be summarized in 3C. A leader has to be competent. And that goes back to Sir David Spiegelhal just saying, you have to have the data, you have to have a good chart, you have to have so there has to be some competence, because if a person is not competent, people will not follow. The second thing is they have to have a compelling narrative. This is where we're going. They have to be compelling. And the third is they have to be compassionate and actually lead by example and really believe in the vision and go ahead. And if you have these 3 C's, so you have a plan, you want to go there, you're competent, and you have a good story about what you're doing, people will actually happily go along. And then if you say, well, I don't know in this particular moment, I don't know what to do. That's just a subset of at this moment, I don't know what I'm doing.
No, I know, but I know so many incompetent leaders, and they still have a lot of followers.
I'm going to be there for them,
But I will say on that front, I find it so interesting because I actually think leadership is a lot less about the actual competencies and capabilities and more about the perception of those competencies.
If you can take these 3, you're a good leader.
Exactly. But I think that's the perception of, right? And that then comes to a question of what is your definition of leadership? Mine is not that a collective follows you. I think it's actually that you're able to bring out leadership in others, that others then go off and create and build incredible things, that they have incredible teams, that they build incredible industries, that they take on incredible risks because you've been able to help cultivate those skills out of them. And I do think our current political economy is actually an excellent moment for us to really challenge our definition of leadership, because if what we have is anything to go by, I mean, we don't, like the future is not looking so bright. So I do think it's an opportunity to say, let's really reassess how we talk about leadership and how we teach leadership. But I do agree with you, the perception of those things is very compelling.
Yes, there's a difference between a great manager and a great leader. So don't mix that up. A great manager is competent, well organized, get things done, follow up very well, like, really competent. But would somebody follow him? Maybe yes, maybe no. A good leader, on the other hand, people will walk through fire for you. When you don't have a fancy title, people still come up and they respect you because that is earned. So I am of maybe a school of thought that leadership is not trained, it's innate in you. And if you have it innate in you, you can nurture it, then you can train it. But if you don't have it innate in you, and you just say that I can train you and you'll be a great leader, then we don't need elections. All we need is do an IQ test, pick the smartest IQ Malaysian at 25 years old, say we send you to the best schools in the world, you come and join us, we train you to be the best leader, and we have the smartest guy with the highest IQ and he's the best leader. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. Many times in school, it's the guy with straight C's that everybody wants to follow. The guy with straight A's and is the smartest one, nobody wants to follow.
Because he has the best vibe. It's about the vibes. But
okay, I was straight B, so.
But just to build on that, one point I do want to touch on is the point on compassion, because I actually think that's an underscored value in leadership. And to your point, the intellectual intelligence is not the full sum of the parts. It really is about bringing that emotional intelligence, compassion, et cetera in. And the third thing I would say is risk. All great leaders have a healthy appetite for risk. And they might not necessarily always show that, but they have a healthy appetite for risk, especially if they can weather storms. And the example you gave of Fuji is excellent. There's a certain level of risk tolerance you have to say we're going to completely step away from our industry and into another because of the kind of foundational asset that we have and the foundational intellectual property. And I think oftentimes, to your point, you might have followers, but without risk appetite, you're actually not creating new innovations in the same way. You're not taking the same challenges on in the same way. And so I do wonder, how do you cultivate risk? How do you cultivate empathy? And how do you make those equally hallmarks of leadership in the way people look at competency or charisma, et cetera, I think is a really important question.
Well, so I think there's a character trait that the people who fly military aircraft, fighter jets, and quarterbacks in American football and entrepreneurs share, and that is they have an ability to make quick decisions under uncertainty, and they can also forget, right? So they make a decision. Doesn't matter what the outcome is, and that they go on and make another decision. And so they can take a deliberate and measured risk. I would be a horrible quarterback because I would throw the ball in all kinds of directions. Even if I had the physical skill, I would probably not have the decision making in that moment. And so I completely agree. It's at the core of an entrepreneurial ability is to take measured risks under uncertainty.
I agree. The capacity to live for people is the number one in terms, as you mentioned, in compassion. And when I say capacity to live for people, it doesn't mean that you don't fire your people, you don't discipline them. But your decisions always take into consideration, your people. Even when I let go somebody, they still have a family to feed. If I have to err on being a little bit more generous, a little bit more stingy in a way, I always try to be a little bit more generous. So I think the capacity to love your people is key. One way, I advise my managers, always, everyone has a story. Think from the other person's perspective. It will definitely help guide you in many of the decisions you have to make.
No, one of the best pieces of advice I had ever received actually was from an ultra high net worth individual, and we were helping kind of shape their family office and family foundation. And he said something that was interesting to me. He said, I always approach every situation, every relationship, every opportunity, every employee from a place of appreciation, not expectation, even if they have underperformed. I appreciate that for days, for years, they came and worked here. And I show that respect and that appreciation when they're leaving because they showed me that respect and appreciation. And he said, and I asked him, I said, well, but how about if they're leaving on not the best terms? And he said, one action is not the sum of its parts. And that's how, he had been able to, and I think of that often. I think of that in my marriage. I think of that in my work. I think of that in my partnerships. Because if you are showing up with a humility and with a respect and with an appreciation, not an expectation, you very rarely get disappointed. You're always there and you're like, okay, well, this is going to be a panel where we talk about leadership and I'm going to appreciate that we're going to learn from each other here. But there is no expectation. And I think that a lot of your strongest leaders walk in with an appreciation for the moment they're in, for the opportunity to lead in that moment, and for the opportunity to build an effective team, an effective strategy. And I will say, even in conflict, and this is something that I know might be a bit controversial, but if you look at take militias, take military leaders who are effective in fragile settings and in conflicts, it's the ones who appreciate the circumstances they're in, not who try to build expectations around them. They appreciate, they leverage, they take advantage, and they build. And I think that is actually a very smart skill to have because it can help you create resilience and capacity at times where you don't necessarily have the tools or the finances or the circumstances to do it.
I work around the world and I manage Japanese, Americans, Saudi, and sometimes people say, oh, you can't manage a Japanese unless you're Japanese. You can't manage a Saudi unless you're a Saudi. To me, it's all rubbish. If you extend respect and you're honest with people, it transcends all culture.
Thank you very much. That was interesting. Now, just before we came up, we talked about the notion of the superhero CEO. Someone who can do no wrong, someone who has all the answers.
Thank you for talking about me like this. Thank you.
You're welcome. You can buy me teh tarik after this as well. Yes. But again, I'd like to be able to just go into that because in some of the schools of leadership and whatnot, they do talk about the fact that a CEO must be everything to everyone almost. Now, given the complexities of the times, given the fact that we've got AI and the fact that all of the expectations are there, does that notion still hold? I'd like to hear from, again.
So I don't think, first off, I don't believe in the notion of a superhero CEO. I think we need less CEOs who think they are superheroes. And I think we need more... I think we need more CEOs who feel fundamentally accountable for the way they lead and what they lead. And I think that is so pronounced right now, especially in a time of AI. Because by nature of their role, they are making decisions that will have implications not just for their own employees and their families, but for communities and societies writ large. And I think a bit of humility can be very helpful there. But that being said, I think it's so interesting because we often conflate CEOs with really effective leaders. We assume if somebody is a CEO, they are because they're such a great leader. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been in rooms with people and I've been like, really? You're the CEO? Like there is an element, but truly there's an element of many industries, many companies reward loyalty. They reward a lack of risk. They reward. You will have CEOs who got there by consequence of having been there a long time. At times, you will have CEOs who got there by consequence of who they knew, and that's how they. So I think we need to decouple the notion that formal positions of leadership are what signify leadership, and recognize that it's actually competencies, capabilities, and you'll find a lot of people who build vehicles or who work in somebody else's platform or vehicle who are much more effective leaders than people who are in the default position of CEO. And if AI will do anything, I think it will show us, I think it will really illustrate for many in a lot of industries where real leadership lies, and where real ingenuity and human, the ability to connect with other humans, the ability to have a vision and articulate it, the ability to be able to advocate for it, mobilize for it. I think that will be something we see in this next iteration of leadership.
Those that didn't clap in the front are the super CEOs, you know that, right?
No, I know. I saw one of them look at me and he's like, oh.
Okay, that's where the board and the chairman is crucial. For a short while, I was working in Singapore, but I was also chairman of Citibank Malaysia Berhad. And Piyush was the CEO. He got me to join the board and he made me chairman. So my daughter got very excited, because, wow, you're chairman of a bank, but it's really a subsidiary. And she asked me, do you have a gavel to, hit on the table, and what's your power? And I thought about it and said, I don't really have any power except to hire or to fire the CEO. And ultimately that's the power of the chairman. So picking the correct CEO, is so crucial a decision, or firing the CEO is so crucial a decision that it can set the tone for the rest of the term of the company. Now, to give credit to, I think, Malaysian companies, I've seen some that they have taken bets on very young people who's not just, been there for a long time, or, they part of least resistance by taking no risk. So they've taken young people with fresh ideas to, test to see how it goes. So I think we are making progress in that sense.
Professor, your thoughts on the fact that you have, again, compared in your earlier presentation, to some extent, the leadership differences between the Americans as well as the Japanese. In your particular perspective on this particular nature of a superhero CEO, is there such a thing in Japan, or is there any kind of differences that you would see based on what you just heard?
So I agree with that. I think the superhero is, exaggerated. And we see that sometimes somebody becomes CEO and everybody says, who is that person even? And they turn out to be just like these really great leaders. And I think it goes back to some of the things you said about their people skills. And I also want to bring it back to, if I may, to strategy. I think this vision or the narrative or the sort of, I think what makes us a leader, and by the way, we're not just talking about CEOs, right? It could be a leader of a division or a business unit or a department. But I think what makes them a good person is that they actually have a vision, or they have an ability to articulate the truth. And since our topic is uncertainty, I wanted to share one that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Jeff Bezos, and you can think of Amazon and him, what you like, but he actually is a great strategist. And he has formulated as the main strategy for Amazon, where we buy things, not the AWS, but the actual original Amazon bookstore. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what is going to happen, how are we going to buy things and so forth. And he said what we're doing here is we're going to focus not on what's changing, we're going to focus on what will always be true. And in our case, what will always be true is that people want more selection, lower prices, faster delivery. And as long as that's exactly what we do. We have more selection, lower prices, faster delivery. As long as we have those three things, it actually doesn't matter what's going to happen, we will always be successful. And so first of all, I think that's a really great advice, to focus on not on what's changing, but on what will always be true. But I also think it's a great example of leadership and sort of the ability to identify very clearly what needs to happen. Some sort of ability to put this into 3 sentences is helpful, right? And so he has this very pithy thing that people can remember. And then basically just the old Jack Welch line, a good leader is relentless and boring. Right? So say it again and again. Every time somebody comes and says, what shall we do? Well, does it increase the selection? Does it lower prices? Does it increase delivery times? Yes, we'll do it. If not, why would we do it? And it is that sort of beacon that goes through the strategy, I think, that makes for a great leader. And then everything else goes from there, I think.
I actually want to build on that. I don't know how many of you are following the mayoral election in New York, but it's an excellent example of exactly this relentless framing around affordability. 3 things: free buses, childcare, groceries, and affordability. And that was it. Asked about anything, you wing it back to affordability because that's the focus. But it does, we had been talking before about political leadership and kind of what we're seeing in the political arena. And I think one thing that is important to emphasize, to your point about the ability to communicate something, is that the communication actually does need to be clear and does need to have it needs to be, to a degree, visionary. It has to be a plan. And what I mean by that is it's not enough to say, well, I'm just not the other guy, or the alternative is worse. And we know this especially from security studies. So in countering violent extremism, historically, there had been an assumption that counter narratives would work. So you would just simply say, okay, well, that's bad, don't do it. And what they learned was actually people are more attracted to the original message. They're like, wait, those guys are very black and white. It's really clear what I'm getting out of this. I have a lot of agency and power. I'm very needed, and it really strikes that human desire to be needed. And so over years, we've learned that actually third-party narratives, being able to present your vision unmoored by the original narrative, but with clear consequence and clear agency for people, is critically important. And that really motivates them to follow you, to learn from you, and to listen to you. And that's now been applied in business settings and universities, et cetera. But that recognition of a very clear message, again, that clarity is kindness. So even what you don't know, articulating that in a way that's clear and that makes people feel like, listen, you have agency, you're part of this, and we're actually going to get an answer, is really powerful.
Thank you. I'd like to see whether we have any questions from the floor. Do we have? Okay, we have one. Can we get a microphone, please?
While the microphone is wondering, I just realized I didn't answer your question. So among the Japanese leaders so my research design that I presented earlier was basically to go and interview the leaders of the highly profitable companies and see what they had in common. And what they all had in common was that they had these attributes of a clear vision. They were usually very humble. They were just part of a long-term employment, and I became the CEO, and so now I'm running this, and they were able to get the people excited.
My Japanese hero as a CEO was Konosuke Matsushita, the founder of Panasonic. That guy, I thought, really stands alone by himself.
Okay. Thank you. Again, sorry, we had a question. Yes.
In an era of pivot predicament, very clearly, the person who is well adapted to change will come out the winner, or the one that survived the best. Question is, if I put a potato and an egg into a boiling water, you will see the potato turn soft, but the egg turn hard. The issue is not the water, because it doesn't determine the outcome. The water doesn't determine the outcome. It is the response of the egg or the potato to the hot water. As Vivian Green used to say, life is not waiting for the storm to stop. Life is learning to dance in the rain. What growth mindset is best suited and can be trained for future readiness, upskilling of our young talents to be better prepared in the era of uncertainty?
Okay, let me try that. When I spent my first 27 years with Citigroup, and it was an amazing organization when I was there. And the way they pick young managers is they consistently push us off the deep end. You swim or you sink, and if you sink, you're out. But they're not worried, because even if you sink, you're out, you'll find something good outside. But by consistently testing them, pushing them when they're very young, they learn, that more often than not, even if they don't know, they will know how to survive. So that kind of program that you must have in an organization, I think is important. We are sent to fix a problem, or we are sent to build a business. And within 4 or 5 years, you pack your bags and you are sent out again. So we have a sort of a program called International Staff, where we don't serve the bank in one country, we serve the bank around the world, and they send us where there's a hot spot or a trouble spot. So that kind of grooming, which is why I think a lot of American companies, before you make CEO, they will test you abroad. So at least that's from my personal experience when I was with Citi.
I'll just build on that. So I am the middle of 11 siblings. I have 5 older brothers and sisters and 5 younger. So everything I learned about adaptability, I learned around a dinner table, and what I will say was literal war with my siblings. Because you had to both compete with them, you had to learn from them, you loved them, you went home, you negotiated, you had their back. There is an art, I think, that taught me. And that's not replicatable in every family, but what is at a young age, putting children in circumstances and in spaces where they meet people that are different than them, where they have to learn how to have constructive and respectful conversations and debates, where they have to explore. So now I find a lot of parents, and I have 2 young children myself, but a lot of parents put their children in activities their kids like, and only things they like. They cater a little bit more to the comfort of their children. And you know, there's a running joke in Canada about getting participation trophies, you know, when you show up. And for my parents, those just weren't realities. It was, you're gonna do this because 6 of your siblings wanna do this, majority wins. Deal with it. And so you had to start learning and recognizing and getting comfortable in places you were uncomfortable in. And the second thing I will say to that is, if you take that same egg and same potato and you throw them on concrete, you get a very different result, right? And what I mean by that is, I don't think we should ever underestimate the culture and the context in which leadership gets to show up. It looks fundamentally different. There are rooms where I show up and I am not seen, I am not perceived to be an innate leader because of how I look and what I represent. And there are rooms where I will know 10 times more and I will be perceived by that audience and that community as knowing more. So I think one really great skill in leadership is knowing what is my sphere of power and my sphere of influence. You might not be a leader in every room, but if you're a leader in one and you really dominate that domain and you can cultivate leadership in others in that space, you create a much bigger opportunity apparatus and playing field.
Thank you. Number 4.
Sorry. I have a question for Mr. Lim. This is a question that I think many people in this room have the answer, but every now and then we hear that people get it wrong and you get skirmishes. So can I ask you, from your perspective, on the relationship between the chairman and the CEO and the separation of roles between them? Your own personal nuances from your battle scars. Thank you.
Okay, I guess the closest experience I have is really in DBS because I sit in the executive committee, and Peter Sia, our chairman, and Piyush is actually a great combination, the best I've seen. You know, so the chairman doesn't interfere with the executive running. I think there are some chairmen that tends to, and some boards that tends to interfere with the executive running. And because I used to sit on boards of public listed company and I'm an executive myself, there are times when I tell other board directors that that's a tactical question, that's not a strategic question. So the chairman must know how to lead and keep the board directors at bay, that they don't interfere with the day-to-day running of what an executive manager should do. So you be very clear with your responsibility, that your strategy, your the values, but the tactical execution, how you discipline the managers or what area you want to get into after the framework is set is really the executive decision. So the chairman must know how to balance and pull back board directors that ask too tactical, too deep, questions that's really not their responsibility, if I may be blunt. Those clapping must be executive, right?
Yeah, they're having trouble with their boards.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from number 6.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kokwe. And I think we talk a lot about leaders from, management and managers, but, I have questions about followers. So, for example, today is my 5th day. I'm a fresh graduate, 5th day joining the workforce. So my question is, as followers, as fresh grads, what are some ways that we can follow good leaders? How do you identify good leaders that you can learn and follow? And what are the qualities that we should be looking for?
Don't underestimate yourself. All good leaders are good followers. So don't think that because you have a rank and you are a leader, you can only lead. All good leaders are good followers, for he who cannot obey cannot command. Okay, so you are a leader to your peers, or within the vertical or junior people underneath you. You are a follower to your boss. So don't underestimate yourself. You are also a leader in your own right.
I would also add that it's very important to be a good mentee, and that sounds maybe counterintuitive, but we all have been told, you know, you need a mentor, and there's a mentor who helps you grow in your job and learn and so forth. But the mentor can only be effective if the mentee, the person being mentored, is actually proactive about it. And so my advice for you on your 6th day on the job would be to identify the mentor, maybe you've been assigned one, and make sure that you get on their calendar and make it easy for them to be a good mentor. So you can actually help yourself by being a sort of a proactive person being you know, sort of grown in the company.
And I would add, I think this is industry agnostic and sector agnostic, but I think go where you feel your values are seen and respected. I think it is incredibly challenging to feel, there's this old saying, you know, you don't go to a job, you leave a job, you don't leave a job, you leave a manager. I think that's all quite true. And I think that it is very challenging to feel like you are getting purpose and value from a person if you don't feel purpose and value in the space that you're in. So I would optimize for what really feeds your life mission, your purpose, what speaks to you, and then from there you will find yourself attracted in those spaces to leaders who really amplify that, elevate that. But I would never ignore, I think sometimes we tell particularly young professionals, just go where you can get opportunity, go where you can get a better salary, go where, but I think for longevity, really feeling a sense of commitment and values is so important.
Let me give you one advice, and this is a personal experience. When your boss gives you a task to do, don't wait for your boss to ask you the status. Think from your boss perspective. So before my boss can ask me a question, I have the answer for him. Before he can ask me the question, I have half a page of email, bullet points on exactly what's done, what's in status. So think from your boss perspective. If you were the boss managing yourself, how would you want you to interact with your boss? And if you can do that very well, before you know it, your next assignment will keep coming. So when people ask me how did I progress in my career, when I look back, one of the things I've done is that I could always get things done, and I never wait for my boss to ask me the status. I would give him a report before he can even ask what's the status. So keep that in mind. Yeah.
One more question. I apologize, I know there are quite a number. We'll try to get as many as you can. Maybe we'll take number 3.
Hi, I'm Salwa. I have one simple question to all the 3 panels. We always talk about leadership competency, but I would like to learn from the 3 panels, what would be your advice on our leadership kryptonites, things that make us weak, that we need to be able to observe and be mindful? I think the conversation about leadership kryptonite has not been given emphasis.
Weaknesses.
Kryptonite, your weaknesses. Like Superman, kryptonite's
there we go. Kryptonite. Yep.
As the resident superhero on the panel. I think it's an excellent question. So there's this new theory emerging about learning, tapping into what people call their villain origin story as a way in which they can untap their leadership, which is pretty interesting. So somebody, it's circulating that the notion of really being able to tap into your most effective leadership, your most effective North Star mission orientation, you need somebody to help bring that out of you. Like think Penguin and Batman, or Robin, or Joker and Batman, or the idea that knowing what that weakness is actually makes you a stronger leader. I think that to the point about boiling in water, et cetera, I think circumstances are different. I think some things will actually really make you an effective leader in different industries, maybe different chapters of your life, where something will be seen as a huge asset, and then it's seen as a weakness later. One, when you're junior, is consensus building. The person who can go and get the most people aligned on something and can build consensus is seen as a huge strength. And then when you become a leader, the notion of always building consensus instead of making decisions can actually be seen as a challenge, right? I think something that is a huge strength is discernment. and that almost across the board, every leader will say is great. But then you talk to some boards and they're like, wait, we should have actually, this should have been more transparent. We would have loved more information. We would have loved to be included sooner. So I don't think you can identify across the board. It would be such an overgeneralization to say every single leader has this kryptonite. I think in the same way leaders have unique strengths, and those strengths are at different percentages. So one might be incredibly charismatic and visionary and be able to articulate a vision, and their number two has to be exceptional at operations. They have those same weaknesses. And the way that I think you offset that is in your leadership team. You start looking at, okay, who do I need to help? I'm an expert in something, but who do I need who can really help me deliver on something else? So I wouldn't look at it as kryptonite. I would actually look at it, if you have the building blocks of leadership, if you are somebody people trust, if you have a strong kind of commitment to vision, if you are able to engage and amplify others, I would really look at it as, what are the areas in which I either I grow myself, the qualities I grow myself, or honestly, I supplement with great leaders around me.
Yeah, I don't know if I know how to answer your question directly, but sometimes there are leaders who, or bosses who need to be the smartest guy in the room and have to have the final say, and versus somebody who has the humility to do the job, which means they are willing to listen and they are willing to think that maybe they could be wrong, so you got to know how to discern between the two of them and learn from it.
I think this goes also back to maybe the superhero, or how important the superhero is. I actually think that the leadership team thing is also often underestimated, and that the strong second is usually the player that determines whether this venture will be successful or not. How good is the team? And how strong are the other people on the team? Because no leader can win just by themselves. Right? They need the second and another second and the right hand, left hand, whatever the imagery is. But how strong are the team members is usually the more important than this one person superhero.
Yeah, I think you can measure a really strong leader based on the people they surround themselves with. If you notice that they are surrounding themselves with really strong, capable, competitive, then you know that is not a weak leader. They are comfortable with brilliant people around them. They can hold their own. They can build a strong team. But if you find that that team continues to be weaker, ineffective, not relied on, unable to deliver, then I do think that is a question of that core leadership and why they have built a team to structure that way. So you can have the smartest, most capable person in the world, but if they can't build that platform, then it's very hard to go very far.
Okay, it looks like we're out of time. I apologize for those who have questions. But again, thank you very much for all the insights. Dr. Alaa Murabit, Mr. Lim, Schaede, we appreciate the time and effort that you've taken to contribute this. And can I encourage a round of applause for our panelists?